Odete Garcia de Consuelo was buried somewhere in the Amazon in the early months of 1984. The buses which through the years had brought Odete Garcia, her family, and many others to the region were laid to rest in a nearby cemetery. Odete Garcia had come to the region as a child. The whole area was then covered by a dense tropical forest, with one muddy road cutting across it. Trucks would spend days and sometimes weeks to reach their destination. Odete Garcia's parents knew little about the Amazon when, like many others, they took that road to wherever it would lead. They had only vaguely been told of the hardships and diseases in the middle of a despairingly endless forest. A forest that would feed on itself to flower year after year. Even less did they know this was a land of water as much as it was a land of trees. Almost exclusively water in some places after the rains reached their peak. With poisonous marshes where the vegetation rots and the mosquitoes prosper. Where crocodiles would lurk in the stagnant waters or slowly digest their last prey in the warmth of a mud hole. Beyond the only road, most travel was done along the glittering rivers. Now and then a few explorers had pushed further along those rivers, most often adventurers who had come in search of gold. Early in the century, some foreigners had spent years building a short railroad into the jungle, and thousands of their workers had died from yellow fever. By the time Odete's family arrived, the locomotives were resting in the forest which had swallowed the railroad, and the slowly meandering rivers remained the best way to travel around the region. Odete's parents first settled in one of the villages which had grown spontaneously along some of those rivers. Even pets come from the water in the Amazon. This even if some people play around with other animals. Odete found herself a young crocodile to play with and frighten away the boys. Since her father came from a family of farmers, she found it difficult to adapt to a place where fishing provided the main source of income. For a time, he joined the Garimpo on the Rio Madeira, one of those gold mines where thousands come every year to try their luck. Many such garimpos mushroomed on the sand dunes which emerged along the rivers during the dry seasons. Gold was, however, found in the bottom sands, and divers spent long hours every day searching for it with their hands in the total darkness of the silted river. The only ones who made any money there were the young and arrogant divers who would kill a man just to prove they were one themselves. Odete's father did not stay long in the Garimpo. The family moved further up the river, where they cleared a bit of forest and built themselves a simple house. The house was built of mud held together with branches from the forest. The holes in the mud were perfect for bugs carrying a variety of diseases. Odetta's father planted some coffee seedlings the way his father had shown him back in the south. He often wondered whether the old man was still alive. The soils were not particularly fertile, but the rains were abundant and well spread, so that every year he planted a new plot into coffee. The daily fare of the family was complemented from time to time with one of the chickens who scavenged from the pot in which they would later be cooked. Until his coffee trees started to bear, Odetta's father worked a good part of the year in a large ranch cut out of the forest by a southern company looking for a tax shelter. The company owned many cattle and horses, and hands that could look for them were scarce in the region. The manager of the ranch had a swimming pool built for himself. Once or twice a year, he would throw a big barbecue around it for guests coming from other ranches who would fly in their small private planes. On such occasions, a tortoise might also be cooked in its shell for appetizers. Or better, a crocodile might be killed slowly under the sun, not to harm its precious skin, for the delicious lobster-like meat of its tail. The farmhands and their children were not allowed into the pool. They had instead the waters of the river in which to wade or wash. Those were happy years for Odetta Garcia. The river was quiet and cool. She would spend hours watching the water run under the gallery of trees. There were little birds who built their nests with small branches and mud from the river, so much like her own house. There were also big birds who lived in large families on top of the trees. Now and then, the male would fly away, maybe to fetch a piranha for the young ones to share. She particularly enjoyed watching those large black-headed storks, which the local people called tuyuyus, gracefully take off when approached and glide away on the quiet waters of the river. And the many birds, unknown in the south, flying above her head. Odetta often wondered why the school she had attended for 2 years at a riverside town had not taught her any of this. The Amazon, in which they lived, together with the birds, together with the river. She would wait until the sun disappeared behind the last vapors of the day before returning home. And the next morning, she would be there to see the sun rise under the branches of the trees. And the forest would be as mysterious as ever, and the river as quiet as the day before. On some days, a slim boat would float down the river, carrying Indians to the market town. Local folklore abounded with stories about naked savages who blended into the forest, fished the rivers with bows and arrows, and from time to time killed a rubber tapper who had strayed too far into their territory. But the Indians Odetta saw wore clothes, and a woman missionary had taught them to speak Portuguese and possibly to fear the Christian God. They lived a miserable, sedentary life, grew some manioc and corn, and no longer went hunting. The Indian women, like the white women, spent their days cooking for the family. Indians had no immunity to the flu or the measles brought by the white men. There were always sick people in the village who would sleep in isolated beds. Still, some of the Indian babies and their mothers looked healthier than most settlers, who would fall victim to malaria almost as soon as they arrived in the region. There were other Indians, however, deeper in the forest, who were still very primitive, such as the small Uru-Eu-Wow-Wow tribe, which had only recently been contacted. Such tribes were feared both by the settlers and by the other Indians. Each tribe spoke a different language, and this made communication even more difficult. Yet, once contact had been established through protracted exchanges of gifts like pots and pans, most primitive Indians proved to be rather good-humored people. Shirts were particularly valued by the Indians. The honor of wearing them went first to the tribe elders. Most of the younger folk would continue going around naked, even when one of those big white birds brought government officials down from the sky, unless the plane failed to make it to an unkept Earth landing strip. As still very young children, oblivious of being the sons of fierce warriors, they would let themselves be scared by the strangers and would quickly run into the rain. Primitive Indians lived in small nomadic groups in precarious balance with the limited hunting potential of their territory. They built simple huts in their temporary villages. The women would light a fire in the middle of the hut on which to cook a meal. Otherwise, they possessed very few things, but what they owned they would share with the others, quite unlike the white savages who trespassed into their forests. The rule of sharing was also applied to those white strangers who would sometimes bring the funniest and most useless articles you could imagine. Meanwhile, things were moving in the area. The government encouraged settlement, although it provided little infrastructure to back it up. Farmers came together to build precarious roads through which to export their coffee. Small towns developed here and there along the main highway, where the villagers would come on their horses to buy a few beers or play a much appreciated game of snooker. As the towns grew into cities, more and more trucks used the only highway known as BR 364, linking them to each other and to the south. Local trade expanded to cater to the specific needs of the truckers. Simple hotels helped many drivers avoid the dangers of traveling during the night. The small cities gradually developed sidewalks and loafers on those sidewalks, who watched the town girls walk by wearing jeans, a fashion which the village girls knew little about. Even an odd dentist or doctor would settle in the larger towns, immune from any competition. The same could be said of pharmacies. Such services attracted many villagers to the region, who also came to sell their various produce at the local markets. Mostly colorful fruit and vegetables, lemons and roots and squash. And also Amazonian fruit, which they had not known back in the South, but came to appreciate more and more. Chicken were usually sold alive, the best proof that they came fresh from the farm. Meat was cut on demand for the customer, and even cooked for him if he wished to have a quick meal on the spot. Fashion went one step further when girls started wearing shorts to the market, an excellent place to shop for a husband. The man who was to become Odette's husband came to the region, like many others, without a penny in his pocket, but with a lot of hope and tenacity. Odette loved the way he would bend his head to light a cigarette. They were married in a church recently built, which no one would have recognized as a church if it weren't for the cross on the roof. Odette would have preferred a wedding under the large flowering tree, but her parents wouldn't hear of such fancy ideas. Odette's husband had claimed for himself a plot beyond the last settler on one of the dirt roads leading away from the main highway. Like all the others who had preceded him on those roads, he started by felling a few acres of trees on the better soils of the plot. The few trees that would bring him some money, he sold to truckers who came up to the farm, and this provided him with a small working capital. During the dry season, he and Odette set fire to the remaining vegetation, as was the practice of all the settlers around. A lot of dry branches burned into deep smoke, and their ashes enriched the soil with much-needed minerals. With hundreds and thousands of farmers burning their plots at the same time, it would take long for the smoke to clear away. Not before the winter rains settled all the ashes into the earth. The planting started even before the rains came and the smoke cleared away. The trunks of the trees which found no buyer were left lying on the soil, while coffee and rice were planted between them. Within 5 years, the trunks would rot and the coffee plants would be in full production. Although Odette's husband had first planted coffee as everyone else did, he soon discovered that he could grow vegetables on the better soils of the hillside. It wasn't long before they were growing the largest cabbage in the region. And where cabbage grows in quantity, so they say, do children. Or did the black-headed storks have something to do with that? As more and more of the forest was cleared, the dirt roads trailed more than 50 miles away from the main highway. A long distance to take the produce to market, or a sick person to the doctor. This was when the government decided to build new service centers with an administrative building, a smaller school, and an even smaller health post. Work was started to pave the 1,000-mile-long highway linking Porto Velho to Cuiabá through Rondônia and improve the side roads that led to it. Heavy construction equipment could be seen everywhere along the still muddy road. The whole thing was a bonanza for the larger construction companies of the country, but local contractors also made some money improving the minor roads. New migrants did not wait for the construction to be completed. Buses brought every day increasing numbers of settlers. Trucks rushed in to buy local produce to take back to the southern markets. Other trucks brought the equipment needed during election campaigns. And credit for the whole operation went to all the right politicians. Odetta Garcia was one of the few people in her area who could read and write. When the government built a school not far from her farm, she was asked to be one of the teachers. There was an enormous demand for education. She worked the afternoon turn, and long into the evenings she would linger in the classroom. When she heard that the state government had received new books better adapted to life in the Amazon, she decided that she would be one of the first teachers to have them. With the new road now almost completed, she could go to Porto Velho, the state capital, and return the same day. She got a ride in the small alcohol-fueled Volkswagen of the village administrators. While still on the earth access road to the village, they passed the bus which had started regular services when the new roads were built. By the time they reached the paved highway, it was misty and raining. Yet the large trucks, free of the old mud holes, sped happily on around the curves through the forest. Then it all happened very rapidly. A truck in front of them braked suddenly. The driver of the Volkswagen, blocked by another truck to his left, desperately tried to stop. The last thing Odetta saw was a tree of her forest caught between two trucks.